Welcome to AGAPE Social Justice, where we focus on love, truth, and justice. On today's episode, I'm doing something a little bit different. I am going to get very deep and very personal into something that is important to me, important to my entire family, which is why in studio with me today is my husband, Walter Kreider. For those of you who don't know, I actually am one of the people who inspired federal legislation and statewide legislation that's coming in the state of Michigan regarding toxic mold exposure. My family is just one of millions of families across the country who've been impacted by mold. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking you through some of what our story is. We were recently featured in the Detroit News newspaper, and that only told a portion of our story, but that's one way that we wanted to get the message out so that we can garner support. So just go on this journey with us. At the end, I'll give you next steps in terms of how you can help, because there's so many other people who don't have anybody who's listening to them and helping. So I'm going to welcome you, Walter, and bring you into the conversation now.
Well, thank you.
You ready to go for it?
Let's do it.
So part of me is like, I don't even know where to start, because how many people have actually had experiences like ours? We've had 3 homes with toxic black mold, which is like unheard of, right? And we have a number of illnesses and sickness and things that have kind of spiraled from what we've gone through. So my thought is, let's just start with, when we first moved and having that exposure and how we found out. So I'll kick it off, and then you can just kind of jump in and fill in as that.
Well, we moved from Highland Park to that of Bloomfield Township, Bloomfield Hills, and our first home had mold, but it wasn't obvious in terms of you couldn't see it with the eye, and that's probably the most dangerous thing when you talk about mold, because it's a silent killer and it's invisible, at least to the naked eye, but obviously not to the nervous system, and that exposure probably started it all off in terms of with your asthma, and I didn't necessarily experience any overt symptoms at that particular time in that home, but it was the second home that really was the situation that escalated and cascaded, my personal illnesses and that of the rest of our family.
Let's go back and revisit the first house, because people are always asking me this question: how did you know? I have a relative who's been sick, and I think their house might be making them sick too. So tell me how you really figured it out. And one of the things that I tell them is, I don't know if you remember this, when I went to the emergency room, because I thought we had carbon monoxide in the house.
Right.
You remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because I was to the point where I was getting ready to pass out, like feeling like I was going to pass out. I would be, dusting and cleaning in the house, and I would be winded, and I didn't know what was happening to me. So, of course, they didn't know what was going on either. And then at some point, our oldest daughter, who has always had asthma, she and I were both at a farm. I think we were part of a 4-H club event or something.
That was the second home.
Was that the second house?
Yep.
Okay. So I knew that at the first house, something was happening to my respiratory system, but they couldn't figure it out. And that usually it's something that's to that magnitude that causes you to stop and say, okay, something's going on. I don't know what. But we did end up getting blood testing. And do you remember when we were told we had to get out of the house immediately after I don't even remember how I stumbled upon the environmental medicine doctor that I had, Dr. Harbutt, world-renowned doctor, but he was the one who actually explained to me how serious mold is.
Yes.
Because we didn't know what we didn't know, And I remember thinking, oh, we have time, we can pack, we can, get our stuff out and move. And he's like, no, you can't. You need to get out immediately. And the blood test results for myself and for our oldest daughter, Courtney, they were extremely high. And I remember at that point, that was that rude awakening, like, okay, we need to learn more about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was certainly devastating in terms of when we found out the extent of it. coming from an era in terms of me being 62, I mean, I grew up in a house with asbestos, mold, lead pipes, all that type of thing. So when you look at something that you really can't see, um, but yet has, disastrous effects on you, you don't necessarily take it as serious. And I didn't take it as serious. It's like, okay, it's mold. I've been exposed to asbestos as a child, lead pipes. But mold is up there, if not an even greater threat to one's health, versus that of asbestos and lead pipes and all those type of things. Because, again, it's a silent killer, something that you can't see.
I actually feel like, I may have said this to you before, I feel like we need to have as many people who rose up against the Flint water crisis and all the other crises that have happened in the country. I think people need to rise up like this for mold because they don't realize how many people are sick. It literally creates damage to your brain. It's literally affecting our respiratory system and everything else. And I'm trying to figure out how do we get people to understand that.
The mental development of our children and whatnot. And I think about my own family and friends, like the Johnsons, an entire family who died, including the dog.
Oh wow.
Now, do we know if it was mold? Because we were, we were ignorant at that time in terms of the effects of mold, but that could have very well been that of mold. I mean, the mother, the father, Billy died, as well as the dang on dog died as well. Because remember, at our second home, our 17-year-old, 16, 17-year-old cat died. I believe that because of being exposed to mold. So it's something that needs to be brought to the attention, worldwide, certainly.
So speaking of the second house, when we got there, one of the things that people say, well, how is it that when you went to the second home, you didn't know there was mold? So I want people to understand we went into a house that was beautiful, right? I mean, it was renovated. The house has skylights. We had a yard that was like an acre. You know what I mean? Like it was
A hot tub.
a hot tub, your favorite spot, you know. Um, and so people think they have this idea that when you walk into a home, you're supposed to be able to know, right, that there's mold and there's these. So we actually ended up, this was a home we were leasing because at the time we were having the housing crisis. Remember, it was booming in Bloomfield. Like you could barely find any property. So people were just trying to get whatever they could at that time. So we ended up jumping into this lease. We got this renovated house. And I remember when we started having water leaks. And at that time, we were told, oh, it's the skylights. And then it progressed more and more and more. And you probably have a different perspective too, because you made the basement your man cave, right? And then there was just a lot of exposure you had, even more than me this time. But I remember we got to a point where we would begin to see signs of water damage or a leak to eventually it progressed to the ceiling falling in Courtney's room. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And the room was always cold. Of course, we didn't know why. It was a tri-level home, so we just thought, okay, the temperature is off because of the design of the house. But come to find out, there was a hole in the roof, and that's why it was so cold in the room. But when the ceiling fell in, then obviously like, okay, we're done at this point. But in the basement, what did you see? Because it was like ended up being a ton of mold down there where you were.
Well, there was mold in the drop ceiling. I believe that there was mold underneath the floor itself in terms of the parquet wood floor. Um, and in terms of the effects, like I drink a lot of coffee and I have allergies. And I was playing it off to think that, I was drinking too much coffee and that's why I was having these headaches first thing in the morning. And then, my allergies that I've dealt with all my life, it's like, well, just a little more exaggerated than normal. But it was really me reacting to the mold, in the basement.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the case for most people, which is how we end up being exposed to it for such a long period of time because it's our natural inclination, I think, to try to rationalize. Especially, I'm always blaming men for this because it's like, no, I'm not going to blow it out of proportion. Or for Christians, I'm not going to claim that. right? We're good for that kind of thing. And what's happening is that we're damaging our bodies more over a period of time. It didn't help either that we were in a situation where the person didn't want to acknowledge what was wrong with the home. So then that's when I think I kind of switch gears from, let me find out what I need to know about mold and the effects of it, but also what's available for us in terms of laws, because it just didn't seem right to me that we would be in a situation where we were leasing, paying a lot of money, and not being able to get test results, not being able to get immediate remediation, not being able to even be able to say that we want a reputable company to come and remediate, right? And take care of the water leaks and all this stuff. So it dawned on me at this point, we need an outside intervention. So I remember calling the Oakland County Health Department. I called other people, just calling around trying to figure out what we can do, how we can hold people accountable when they are not repairing the homes. And by the way, we had to get out of this house immediately too, which resulted us into going into a hotel for the second time. And I'm like, why should we have to pay? And so it took me down this rabbit hole. But long story short, what we discovered is that there really aren't laws on the books to protect people when it comes to mold. There are very few places. California is one place where they have some things there, but across this country, there is not legislation that exists in order to protect people who are either leasing or people who are buying a home, which we're going to get to next.
And equally as important and devastating is that insurance companies, very few insurance companies recognize that of mold and infestation and the remediation of it.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's my other hot button. That's probably what I want to go after next, which I know what I'm saying, and I know there are people saying it's impossible, but we do need to go there next, because in the midst of us experiencing, trying to get water leaks repaired, trying to get remediation, the insurance company did not want to pay anything. It doesn't matter whether you have renter's insurance. It doesn't matter if you're a homeowner, right? They don't want to pay. They find these loopholes. So when we were I just want to make sure I get this in here too, so people also understand. Before we went to the third home, which was a purchase, we were in a situation we had to move to a hotel again. First time we were at a hotel for about a month and a half, I think. Second time we ended up being at a hotel
11 weeks.
11 weeks, almost 4 months. Not only is that
Almost
over $1,000 a week, but what a lot of people don't understand is we bought commercial equipment, because in order to salvage some of our items, we had to literally take a vacuum over those items where it had a surface where you could vacuum the mold spores. We had to
a HEPA vac.
A HEPA vac. We had to wash every single article of clothing. Like, there wasn't a single one that we didn't have to take to a laundromat and just wash every single. That was hundreds of dollars right there, just washing it. The commercial equipment we purchased was hundreds, if not thousands. I don't know how much you pay for that. We had mold products that we used to literally wipe down.
And we still use to this day.
Still use to this day, wiping it down. We had items we couldn't salvage, because if it was what they call it, porous surfaces or something, then it's just too dangerous to try to hold on to that.
And and that's the real insidious nature of mold, is that it hangs around forever on different materials and whatnot. Like just the other day, I pulled something up out of the crawl space that I knew had been in the crawl space where the mold was, and as soon as I grabbed it, I could smell it. Like it hit me like, I just had that feeling. And so obviously I took the decon wipes and wiped it down before I brought it in the house, but that's been over 6 years, and still mold spores are connected to, some of our, some of our properties that was exposed to it.
And that's why it's better to just get rid of stuff. I mean, in this case, you had to isolate it in an area away from us, but it's
outside of the house.
Outside of the house, it's better to just get rid of it, because those mold spores, people don't realize, would travel with you and will go to the next place. So we literally had
and multiply.
And
once they get there.
And multiply once they get there. And so that's why we had to go through everything we did. We literally took wipes and wiped pens, wiped books, like wiped everything. Imagine, I just want our viewers to imagine taking everything in your house that you have and getting wipes and wiping that down. Imagine the number of not just hours and days, but weeks it takes to do that. And we had a crew of people, who came to help us. There were some people who were actually scared to come because they didn't want it to come back into their homes. But that's what it's like,
I mean, the fear of mold is almost as dangerous as the mold itself. I mean, once you really understand,
Right.
what's at stake.
Right. No, that's true. And I think going into the second house, I had a heightened sense of fear, which is why I was kind of all over it. Like, let's do testing. Let's make sure we, retest. And by the way, one of the things that we learned too was not just to test the air. Okay, because testing the air is one type of test you can do. Then there's a test where you can swab the surface, and then they can do that. But then where we really got the most accurate results is when we opened up the space where there was water damage, and then they took a sample from that, and then that gave us a better indication in terms of the toxic mold that was in the house. Now let's use that and fast forward to the purchase of the third home. Okay, so people say, how in the world is it possible that you purchased a home, you paid an inspector, reputable company, paid a lot of money for an inspection, got the report back, and you move into a house and you don't know you have mold? And I think people don't understand is that there are homeowners who are selling properties and they know that they have prior water leaks and they know they had mold or other problems, because we got other stuff going on too, but they know this and they seal it up. Well, when you go to a house and you're looking at the house and then you pay an inspector to look at the house, you don't open walls. And so people kind of expect us at some point to just magically know somehow that there's mold in a house, but you don't know. And it took, 3.5 years before we had an actual water leak?
Right, from the small leak that started from the bathtub that no one was aware of. And that's oftentimes how mold occurs, because you have a leak in an enclosed area and you're not aware that there is a leak, and it's a slow leak. And the next thing you know, the mold creates and it matriculates and that type of thing. And then something obvious becomes apparent. In our particular case, it was, it had finally leaked through the ceiling. And then when we opened up the ceiling, it's like, oh, there's mold here. And then, we dealt with that mold in terms of getting it remediated. But then as they continue to demo the bathroom, lo and behold, the eave of the front porch, which is right next to the bathroom itself, which obviously had been rain damaged during the ownership of the previous owner, mold had set up in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's do the first area that they opened up. It was this slow drip.
Slow drip.
Very slow drip.
And the insurance company didn't cover it.
Won't cover it.
Won't cover it.
First of all, water leaks is in the policy, right? But what they said is, we don't cover slow leaks. How ridiculous is that? They have these loopholes to make sure that people who have paid their premiums for years don't get coverage.
It makes you almost want to go in there and break a pipe and flood out the whole bathroom.
I mean, it's crazy. And then people who I know who have gotten money from their insurance company, they didn't even get enough money to fix it, which is how, one woman who I've kind of developed a relationship with at this point, she was homeless for a year, owned her home, but the insurance company didn't give enough money to repair it for her to move back in. She's now sick, on and off homeless, now finally into an apartment that she's renting. But that's what they do. And I think that's why we need to mobilize people at some point to say we need to hold these insurance companies accountable, because they are literally causing us to be sick and die. There are people who cannot. We were fortunate that we were able to go into a hotel. Most people can't do that. And not that we really could, that it was good for us to do that, because that started draining our savings. It took us spiraling because it was a financial burden to be able to do that. But most people They can't do that. And so insurance companies are contributing to sickness and death.
If you can imagine, this is in Bloomfield, West Bloomfield, Bloomfield Township. If you can imagine some urban areas, where people are not that responsive in terms of when people need help, what they're going through.
Right.
And, I applaud the city of Detroit in terms of what they've done with their rental policies, in terms of the homes have to go through inspections, and they're really eliminating that of the slum landlords. I think what needs to be included on a local level, and thank God for what you've done in terms of inspiring national and state legislators, but in terms of local ordinances, as it relates to um, certifying a home to be rented, I think that needs to be included as well, is that mold testing needs to be part of certifying a home before you rent it. And like I said, I applaud the city of Detroit for what they've done, because they've certainly lifted the bar up in terms of trying to get rid of those slum landlords.
Well, that's a good idea. I mean, maybe we need to talk about that. I've got some county commissioners of mine that I can contact, and some local people with our township to see if we can get something like that enacted, because the burden should fall on the person who is leasing the home, not the leasee, okay? Because it's their responsibility, and right now the laws aren't really protecting people to do that. I know a woman, you know this, I know a woman whose brain has been impacted from mold. And I know a number of other people who have ailments. Our daughter, our oldest, can't be a veterinarian because she became allergic to animals, and that crushed her dream. From third grade, as you know, we have been driving her around everywhere pursuing this dream, and then boom, in an instant, it was gone. And not only does she have the allergies to pets and to farm animals, which we had to get rid of some of our pets, there's a laundry list of foods. And one of the things that I want people to understand too is what we go through as a household, because she has severe allergies, I have severe allergies. That now means we incur more expenses, right? Because we have to buy different types of food that other people don't have to worry about. Our youngest daughter lost partial hearing during this time, and nobody could figure out why that happened to her. Those were hospital visits as well. You had blood clots, almost lost your life over 5 years ago. You're now still dealing with this. It'll be a lifelong thing. That's time you're going to the hospital. That's time you're spending seeing experts, and
time off of my life.
Time off of your life. More money we're spending. I want people to see the snowball effect that not only happened in the first home, the second home, the third home, but like these are things we're going to experience for the rest of our lives. And people just, I don't know that they really grasp it. You know what I mean? That they really get it. But I think we're in a good place now in terms of being able to start getting our story out, which this needs to be one of many conversations we have, to be honest. And getting some of the other people to come forward who are ready to speak and ready to share their stories. We're doing a documentary on homelessness, and part of that is a person who is homeless because of the mold exposure. So I want to find a way to also...
Our daughter's doing a documentary.
Yes, our daughter's doing a documentary.
Our youngest daughter.
Yes.
High school student.
Yeah, that's right. Get it out there. And so my hope is that, connected to what we're doing to help the people who find themselves without housing, that we can also find a way to connect this story and help, all of the people who are impacted in that. But with the federal legislation, thank God for Congresswoman Haley Stevens.
Yes.
I mean, thank God for her. She was one of a handful of people who were willing to talk to me.
And actually listen.
And then actually do something
and did her research.
Okay. Assigned a team to this.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to the legislative director in D.C., was able to give input. They came back to me and said, how does this sound? How does this work? And then, long story short, what we found out is that the basics aren't even there. So we first have to just get like the EPA and all of these other entities that are supposed to protect us to do the research, collect the data, and then put some standards in place that can exist across the country, right? Well, attached to that, as we're looking at this foundational work, is $50 million to go to the states to deal with not only commercial property, but to residential properties and help homeowners who are low income. That's huge. Like, Never happened before, okay? And then we have State Representative Brenda Carter, who is working on 3 bills that will be coming out soon. This is airing in May, but by June, we should have 3 bills from the conversations I've had with her. She's spoken to other people. She understands how serious this is, and there are a number of other people partnering with her too.
So obviously, for your viewers, the call to action is to reach on out to your legislators.
That's right.
By all means, because as we sit up here and we deal with global warming, and obviously that is a serious event and will impact us for a lifetime. However, there's something local that will impact you right now, as well as for a lifetime, and that's mold. So certainly, a call to action for your viewers is to go ahead and get on the horn, send an email, talk to your legislators to go ahead and get these bills passed.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. So I'm just going to segue and close out with exactly what Walter just said. Please, we beg you, contact Congresswoman Haley Stevens. Let her know you thank her. You appreciate her for everything that she's done to work with us to get this federal legislation. It was introduced. We needed to pass. Contact Representative Brenda Carter in the state of Michigan and all of her colleagues and let them know that you need those bills to pass when they're introduced. This is not just about our singular family in terms of what we've been through. This is about people in every single community. Mold does not discriminate. We talked about Bloomfield Township. We talked about the Bloomfield Hills area. We talked about the West Bloomfield area. We talked about people that we know in Pontiac. There are people we know in Detroit and people in Highland Park. This affects everyone. And so we really need the support of you. We need the support of your friends and family. Tell your colleagues, hey, I want you to check out this episode because I remember you said that you might have mold in your home, or I remember you did some remediation. We want to make sure that we begin to connect with more people, connect the dots so that we can help people. Listen, I am convinced that God allowed us to go through 3 homes going through this to get us to the point where we are now. I couldn't rest. I couldn't sleep at night. And I was like, why is this happening? And the message that I heard is that you need to go out and you need to create change. And so now I call to you, do what Walter and I have done and fight for your neighbor, fight for your family, fight for the people across the country who you don't even know.
And if you have mysterious illnesses, by all means, be proactive in terms of going to your medical professional and following up and make sure that they follow up.
Yes, absolutely. Thank God Walter followed up. He could have lost his life. He had blood clots in his leg and in his lungs. So thank you for tuning in. I know this was a heavy episode, but this is just the first of many conversations that we're going to have talking about this issue. Go to the Detroit News, look for the article from last week. And like I said, contact our representatives, let them know that you support the bill. Until next time, we appreciate you so much. We will come back. We will be online too if you want to reach out to us online on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube under Agape Social Justice, and on Twitter we're under Agape Social Just. I also wanted to acknowledge our daughters who have really stood with us for this time. What our young people go through is amazing, and they've just been incredible in going through this journey with us. So from our family to yours, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Thank you for joining us.